Good afternoon, everyone. Please make yourself comfortable, grab your lunches. We are starting shortly with our panel.
Which section of the yeah, so there is a problem on this end, which has to be transferred into the old wing. There were people with cold water several days ago, and they couldn't get it fixed. So.
Mine isn't cold, but it's,
Well, good afternoon. My name is Andrei Robachevsky. I'm a technology program manager at the Internet Society. I'm moderating this panel today. We'll be talking about internet security and privacy 10 years later. Someone asked me, what happened 10 years ago? And I realized, yeah, that's indeed how you can read this title. Probably too late. But today we'll be looking actually forward. Talking about how security and privacy will look in the future in 10 years, 20, or 15 years time. So we'll have interesting discussion with you and our four panelists that I'll introduce shortly. But before, let me just read our note well. This is not the IETF. We bring discussions up level. If any work items are identified, or any further thinking is required, that has to be brought to the IETF working groups. We are on the air, we are being streamed and recorded, and we're stopping sharp at 1:45 to let you all get back to the IETF. Well, our agenda is pretty standard. I'll start with a short introduction, and then we'll have some framing discussion, and at the end, some time for open mic, where we can have a lovely discussion. So let me introduce our panel first. Lucy Lynch, she is leading work on trust identity at the Internet Society. Dave Oran, he works on advanced research in information-centric networking at Cisco. Wendy Seltzer, she is leading work on privacy security and social web standards at W3C. And Danny McPherson, who is defining strategy, working on research and infrastructure and information security at VeriSign. So welcome. Today's discussion. So 10 years from now, it's kind of random point in time. And while I suspect that some of our panelists might have a crystal ball, I doubt they will use it today, especially since our session is recorded and webcast. So the best possible way we can look at the future is just by pure extrapolation, looking what we have today and how that might develop in the future. The internet is changing, no doubt, and our understanding of implications of security and privacy is changing over time too. But how our approaches change, are they changing adequately? That would be an interesting question to ask. And I think what we're going to do, we're going to look at what exists today. Maybe in developed form, or maybe they're just seeds of something that could develop in the future, and look how that will shape security and privacy of tomorrow. So, well, let me, probably when I said we are only looking forward, I was not entirely correct, because in order to do extrapolation, we need more data points than just today. So let me just offer you a simplified glimpse into internet evolution. So The relatively small and trusted network was challenged by its own growth, and connectivity was the key word. But diversity of devices grew. Devices became less visible, more pervasive, and further raising issues of security and privacy. And social implications, they increased dramatically as devices became increasingly mobile and also emitting and transmitting data that have privacy implications such as location or different state. They become also more impactful on our life because they can, for instance, switch off light or electricity or something even more important. And the locality, it changed too. What is the topology of network? How do data travel and where is it located? I think cloud is a great term that kind of encompasses those challenges. And if we look at threats and attacks and attackers, they changed, of course, too. And apart from growing strength of DDoS attacks, exploiting new capabilities of the edge emerged. And new cores emerged, centers of high concentration of traffic and data, be it transcontinental cable or social network or search machine. And see those changes very clearly when we look at, for instance, pervasive monitoring attack. But the question is, how do our security and privacy mechanisms evolve in the background while those changes, sometimes revolutionary changes, are happening in the internet? Another way of looking at this is looking at the elements versus the whole. So I think we have good understanding and grasp on security and privacy of the elements, but while the systems become more complex and more interdependent, do we have good understanding how this plays out and what's the overall security and privacy qualities of the system? And when those systems, even if we can design them secure, resilient, and with necessary privacy controls, when they interact with other systems, as it happens in the internet ecosystem, how that plays out. And also, if you look at even elements, we know that some of the fundamental elements there have known vulnerabilities. Take, for instance, BGP protocol or DNS, right? And while fixes are on the way, they're far from being widely deployed. So, interesting question. At the same time, if you look, internet so far has proven being very resilient. So what holds the internet together? Is it technology? Is it people? Is it money? Or is it coffee? And when you look at, and when we speak about the ecosystem, I think it's interesting to look at different trade-offs and how they interact. It's not always a tussle, right? Some cooperate. Like if you look at the very security and privacy, some of the goals that are not aligned, right? Some of the goals may be conflicting. So it would be interesting to look how they, whether tensions or whether cooperation there. So 10 years from now, and what do we want to know about that? And so without further ado, let me ask the first question, pretty general question to our panelists, which is, what are the critical elements you think that will shape the state of security and privacy in 10 years? And 10 years is a random number, really. Lucy.
So I'm going to start. Lucy Lynch, Trust and Identity Initiatives with the Internet Society. And closer to the mic. Okay. So I have had the rare luxury. It was on earlier. I don't know if it's on.
Try this one. Take that one. Yeah.
So I have had the rare luxury in the time that I've been at the Internet Society to head up an initiative that was crafted up to look specifically originally at the security and privacy tussle. When my work was crafted up, this was during the time that Dave Clark's paper was widely circulated, and that tension between privacy and security was of interest. The Internet Society board met and determined that what they really wanted to look at was trust, managed identity, and at risk analysis. And I think as we talk about moving forward with privacy and security both, that the grammar and that the elements that we have to work on really lead towards risk analysis and towards trust judgments. And our problem is internet scale. And right now, I think we have, in the security domain and in the privacy domain, some of the tools that we need. Sometimes they work well together, sometimes they conflict, but what we don't have is a systems view of how you compose those elements at scale, scoped to the particular use. I think as engineers, we tend to engineer to keep judgment away from the endpoints, from the users, or from the end systems. I think as users, we want convenience. We want to do what we want to do without having to make a lot of judgments in between. I think there's a bad convergence between those two things that keeps you ignorant of what it is that you actually need to do in any given circumstance in order to preserve privacy, to protect data, to ensure that your transport is secure, and that getting a systems point of view with our current elements that allows us to operate at scale is the end goal 10 years from now.
Hi, Dave Oran, old timer, know most of you out there. I'm going to start by looking back a little bit and come from the perspective that for most of the life of the internet was kind of a special place. It held a special place that was in some sense different in its properties from a trust and security and cooperation point of view than the real world, than the rest of the world, all the other systems that make up the world. And I think the transition we've gone through over the previous 10 years is, and haven't quite incorporated or come to grips with, is that the internet, unless we continue to push hard, will be a no better place than the whole world. And it will reflect the problems of the real world, of the physical world, and in its conflicts, its wars, its politics, its money, its criminality, rather than be a place to be a force to make those things better. And we're seeing that asymptotic landing of the internet today into a state where we're upset because it really isn't much better than the real world or the rest of the world. So I think our challenge looking out 10 years generally is what can we as participants in the internet community, both from a technology, policy, and overall citizens of the world perspective, do to use the internet to actually improve the world as a whole, because we're so embedded in all of the systems of the society now. And that's a very, very difficult job, but our leverage is higher than it's ever been. So that's one of the reasons I think this, looking forward, is to what security in technology and what security environment 10 years out could be and will be is pretty critically important.
Wendy Seltzer. So I look at this as a lawyer and techie, and I see technology will continue to improve, I expect, and that's both the technology of protecting privacy and security and the technology of attacking it. So that means that we can't rely only on the technology. In particular, when we look at privacy as a social challenge, we can't rely on technology to keep the information that we disclose to our friends and our colleagues and our systems from being leaked by those same friends, colleagues, systems, collaborators. So we'll need, as we design technology and build on it, to think of the interfaces for social controls and for legal and regulatory controls to make sure that the systems that we're building can have the properties of protecting their users. Some of that will be in designing usability into the systems so that we, the end users, whether technical or less technical, can understand the choices that we're asked to make and can do appropriate risk analysis for our communications over these systems. Some of it will be in sharing explanations of the technology with law and policy makers so that they understand and make better technology-sensitive law and policy around them. I think we will need these systems to give the appropriate feedback to the users and to the law and policy makers so that we can improve their properties.
Okay, so yeah, looking back, I guess 10 years ago we barely had the mobile deployment we have today. I think some of the the untethered devices with location tracking and intersecting those sorts of things with social data is certainly something that's new and profound and is going to have a big impact, I think, in 10 years in the future. So I think that's something that we're going to see a lot of regulation and other things surrounding. At the same time, I think some of those capabilities are going to allow things to be more efficient, more effective, and allow people to shore up their security controls. From an enterprise perspective, it's interesting because on one hand, we have lots of security systems and things we use to protect our infrastructure, and when you intersect those with sort of external systems, everything from badge readers to travel itineraries and flight information, then it helps you be much more concise and have much broader context in what sort of actions you might take to mitigate a threat or what control you might put in place. So I think that you can be smarter, but at the same time balancing privacy of users is going to be important. I guess further complicating that is the consumerization of IT, right? I mean, we certainly want our employees to be as effective as our kids are at school, but it's really tough with the devices and new technologies and capabilities to operate in a secure manner. And so finding ways to adapt and be more agile in what you accept, but also to preserve sort of the key assets or critical components in an enterprise environment is certainly going to be really challenging. From an architectural perspective, I think most of what we add for security in things like the IETF or with protocols and even the implementation side mostly just give you more ways for things to break, right? More ways to get the wrong answer and less ways to get the right answer, especially with some of the integrity functions like for example, what DNSSEC provides. And so making sure that we fortify and think more about the availability of those systems and sort of that availability integrity pendulum is going to be really important. What else here? Security. I think the other thing in the enterprise environment certainly is sort of the the regulatory constraints. Today, we have we have hundreds, if you count subset controls and thousands of numbers of things we have to do just to provide basic to be compliant with regulatory compliance frameworks with which we're captive at my company, and so we put an immense amount of effort in that, and then we do things to make us more secure. Most of those controls were put in place to implement best current practices and sort of just like internet standards, kind of try and raise all boats in the industry and make there be a height limit for some sort of function. And so I think as we continue and there's more sort of more indicators of compromise or intrusion sets and TTPs and all these things people use to protect their infrastructure and systems. On one side of that, there's some of the privacy concerns, and on the other, there's sort of the scorched earth notion. Like, most of the stuff that people share today is nouns, right? It's like who, what, who, or or what number space, namespace, what hash signature, those sorts of things, and maybe some behavioral aspects, like if a host does this and then this and then this, then it's probably malicious activity. But interestingly, with sort of the number and namespace stuff today, it's kind of hard to get that reputation back, and so I think that's going to be a big challenge, both the provenance of some of those data sets and the sort of scorched earth notion in the future. You pick up a new domain name or a new set of IP addresses, and how usable are those, and what sort of residue might be on those from previous activities. So I think that's sort of a broad array of things that I would sort of kick off initially for dialogue, Andre. So.
Yeah, I was deprived from the microphone. Well, I think it's cool. Some of you mentioned some of the social aspects in kind of developing the internet. Maybe I just wanted, maybe you can elaborate, Danny, from operational perspective. Because if you look in the past, I mean, communities and people played a very important role in actually, making the internet secure, right? At least in the early days. But internet grows, right? How do you see, like in 10 years in the future, this component develops? I mean, do we kind of, rely more on automation, or you see increased role of communities and, this kind of people interaction in this space?
Does this work or no?
It should work.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Hear me now? Is that good? Okay, excellent. Okay, because I don't hear the feedback like I did without. So anyway, so I don't know. I think that one of the things that gives me a lot of concern, a lot of activity I see in the IETF and in the security community is with information sharing, right? Everything from, it's some of the most effective things that happen, like closed security groups and other things that are trying to protect some aspect of attacks or false or botnet takedowns, or deal with cybercrime, and or even sort of child abuse materials and those sorts of things, and some of those are very effective. But the interesting thing is there's sort of this intersection now where big data and sharing of indicators and information are kind of coming together, and you have a lot of different people that serve as telemetry sources or sensors of that data and provide various bits of information. And you have a lot of people that sort of want to play in a niche market and say, I'm going to enrich that data and pass it on to people, right? And I'm going to share this information about this thing with these people, either for free or for fee, right? And there's not a lot of provenance, sort of where did that data come from and how was it originated, and how do you get your reputation back, or what if there was misinformation injected into that system? And I really do think that with some of the things in 10 years, there's going to be a lot of scorched earth in the number and namespace that it's going to be hard to find valuable or I guess it's going to be hard to find usable situations for that, where it doesn't break in some IDS or some sensor or some IPS device or someone's blacklist somewhere. And so I think if we don't squelch some of those problems, now, then there's going to be a lot of long-lived issues associated with that. And it's kind of near and dear to the IETF, some aspects of that, everything from the information sharing and so forth. But I think some of the ways that you can be most protected in sort of enterprise security is with information sharing today. But at the same time, that's sort of one of the places where nobody ever tells me to remove anything from those systems, right? And so I think there's going to be some artifacts there that are going to be problematic that we're going to have to learn to deal with.
Okay, thanks.
Is that what you were talking about, by the way? Did I answer your question? Okay, good.
So there's sort of an interesting overlay on top of that if you think far enough ahead, in that every one of us is already becoming a network operator on a very small scale. We all manage multiple devices, we want them to sync, we store stuff remotely. The more that grows, and the more it's associated with identifying data both about you and those devices, there's this personalization and convergence around the person that has effects on privacy, on reputation, on deployability, on all of those things. So if you think 10 years out, privacy and security are once again focused very centrally on the person and the person's devices and that interaction with the system. So you may have convergence on very big providers, but there is this tiny set of very distributed nodes as well that are more and more empowered and more connected and operating across multiple devices with not a good understanding of either privacy or security.
Thank you. Well, we discussed them in the internet. We know all it surprises us all the time, right? Sometimes pleasantly, sometimes unpleasantly, especially when we realize what the implications of new developments are. So my next question to some of you, so do we see seeds of some maybe new approaches that are already there that can help us, maybe unconventional approaches, that can help us tackle this kind of new revolutionary things that develop in the internet? Dave, maybe you can speak to that point.
No. This one's not working? Okay.
Yep, that
So
one's dead.
I drew up two really basic slides here, and apologies in advance to people who are familiar with emerging research in new networking paradigms and new communication and encryption technologies. But I'm a technologist, and I have this, as badly as I want to be pessimistic and gloom and doom, I have sort of like this inherent technological optimism that maybe the next magic bullet is like, one equation or one built system ahead of us. So over the last couple of 3 years, I've been working on an alternative networking technology, generally known as information-centric networking. And it's unclear, even after a lot of people working on it for a number of years, whether it's better than what we have today in the Internet Protocol Suite. But it is unarguably different. And maybe even if it doesn't wind up being a silver bullet, having looked at these alternatives may wind up giving us some insight. So for example, if you look at information-centric networking, it abandons channel security, the kind we get with TLS and IPsec, in favor of object security. So you actually secure the content and don't worry about the channels. And there's a couple of benefits to that. One is that it makes it simpler to understand the chains of custody of content. And second, it allows you to protect content at rest the same way it's protected while in the communication system. The second thing is, unlike the current IP protocol suite where security, confidentiality, privacy, and integrity, cryptographic integrity, were sort of added on as afterthoughts, these systems were designed with cryptographic integrity and, to a great extent, provenance of data built in from the ground up. It's simply essentially not possible except by using null encryption or leaking all your keys to provide the same low level of data integrity and security properties as IP without the channel security. The second thing that's sort of fundamentally different is it starts from the idea that in the default case, sources are completely anonymous. There are no source addresses in these architectures. And hence, the further away an eavesdropper is from the user of the system, the less ability they have to ascertain the identity of the participants. And that has potentially powerful and interesting properties. On the other hand, in order to make this work, the names of the content of the information objects that you want to access is completely public. So there's no free lunch here. You're trading off consumer anonymity for content anonymity, and it's not clear whether that's the correct trade-off. And then from a sort of detailed engineering and protocol design standpoint, there are many different attack vectors in IP in terms of data spoofing and address spoofing and data modification attacks. The list of the total list of the attack surface is extremely large. What these architectures do, for better or worse, is they eliminate a vast portion of the attack surface and map it into a DOS attack. So basically, if you can figure out a viable way to mitigate successfully distributed DOS attacks, you will have solved in this architecture many problems that you have to solve independently in the IP architecture. All that said, there's no magic. The hard problems are still hard. Trust management is an unsolved problem in this world, just as it is in the IP world, and there should be a Nobel Prize for solving the trust management problem, seeing how hard we've worked on it, if anybody can ever do it. And lastly, of course, the business models that support the economics of the internet today are going to apply to a new protocol architecture as well. And if the business models depend on abandoning privacy, it's not clear that a technological fix which attempts to preserve that privacy is of any utility whatsoever. So I'd encourage you to look at these designs and think about them as to whether 10 years out they may in fact be a better match for the state of affairs in the internet. So one more slide and then I'll stop blathering. So the other thing is that the cryptographic research community has made just amazing amounts of progress over the last 20 years, and maybe only the first 10 years of that has started to get incorporated into our production artifacts. And two themes that are pretty strong in the security research community these days may be pretty important 10 years from now. So the first of them is a general area called functional encryption, and it's a number of its practical, well, not practical, but realizations are known as homomorphic transforms. And the main theme here is that it allows you to perform computations on encrypted data, which means that you don't have to decrypt the data in order to do things with it. And that is potentially extremely powerful. Most middle boxes in the internet basically are put there to do things with data, and they have to have it in the clear. If that could change, potentially we could have much longer chains of operations on internet data without actually revealing the data. That's the good news. The bad news is we're about 14 orders of magnitude too slow. We've made a lot of progress. When these were first proposed about 8 years ago, that we were 21 orders of magnitude too slow. So we've gotten 7 orders of magnitude faster. Moore's law will not get us there, incidentally. But there actually are some useful things that, if you'd like to look at, are actually practical today. There's a system that's been built and is being commercialized known as CryptDB that does restricted functional encryption, so you can perform quite interesting, but not every kind of query, but many interesting queries against an encrypted database without any of the data ever getting decrypted, even by the database engine. And then lastly, another theme of research that I think is not specifically networking related, but applies here is there are some very interesting results in privacy preserving query systems where most of the statistical attacks that reveal data and leak privacy in database systems can be foiled by these privacy preserving query systems. And they do it by trading off accuracy of the results against a bound on how much information gets leaked. So if you're willing to issue a query and tell the query system, well, I'm okay if the answer is within 10% of the correct answer, it's potential that that query system could answer that query while leaking exactly 0 information about the actual data stored in the database. So just some ideas about some technologies that may be important in our internet lives, some number of years out. Thanks.
That was the question.
Lots of interesting research, and some of it very powerful, leaves the question of what incentives will the systems that we depend on have to implement those, particularly things like the privacy-preserving query or differential privacy often depends on a cooperative protocol where the server or data collector has to want to limit the data that it's sharing, and the participants in the system have to have some degree of willingness to limit their disclosures or collections. And so along with these sort of mathematical tools, I think we'll also need the social organizing functions of distributed systems and technologies that build from control by the end user, and that enable us to as users to exercise some collective action to demand better security and privacy from the systems that we use.
So yeah, a couple of things I would add, some to what Dave said, and then some of my own thoughts, I guess, is I do think that some work into piloting some of the post-quantum, sort of algorithms, the things that people are looking at, like hash-based signatures. Actually, there's a draft in the IETF now from Dave McGrew and Curcio, I think is his name, on hash-based signatures that provide some protections even in a quantum-enabled world. And I think that we're going to have to start some work on that soon enough, right? And so I think that's interesting things. We're going to have to work that out. But even some of the functional encryption, some of those things, I think sort of the weakest link today, if not sort of the meat computer, the guy behind the keyboard, then certainly the relying party software and the end system implementations are going to continue to need to be fortified. I think that's important. From an integrity and even an object level protection perspective, I definitely agree with what Dave's saying about some of the object level or information centric stuff. I think that the magic in that is certainly the same problems we have: the trust model, the key management, namespace, all those sorts of things that we've been struggling with for every other system we have. And then I think one of the other things that I'll touch on, I think actually Wendy brought up yesterday when we were discussing this, was a lot of the sort of breadcrumbs that are left by what people do today. What enables someone to access a given system, and if there are other things that provide security, is that new observation space, or does that provide new indicators to someone that's looking to observe activity for behavioral analysis, for targeted advertisements, or to track your location and send a snatch team in or something? I don't know. So having having awareness of what enables you to access a resource on the internet, and then what sort of footprints you leave as a result of that is going to be more and more interesting, because I think those are sort of exploited today at every turn you take. And so I think that people will get more and more awareness of that as at least as regulatory compliance associated with privacy continues to evolve.
Thank you. Well, let me probably go to the next question. And Lucy, you mentioned the tussle, right? This privacy and security. And my question, if we look in the future, will security and privacy become more antagonistic or more supportive? So, well, can we maximize both, this kind of stuff? Maybe you can speak to that.
I don't know that you maximize both. I think you balance between these things. And I actually think that a lot of the tools for privacy, things like secrecy and encryption, things like scoping of data, minimization, those things, are also tools that you use in security. So it's figuring out the context for the interaction that you want to have, and who all the parties involved are, and then having a reciprocal relationship among those parties, which gets a little bit back to Dave's pitch for an internet that's better in some ways than the rest of the world. That reciprocity is something that's absent in many of the interactions right now. Things are very asymmetric. Data collectors have enormous power. Individual data subjects have very small amount of power. People don't pay to be part of some of these systems, so they pay with data instead of paying with cash. An economic model that shifted all of that might shift the concern for protecting the individual data subject in a way that's privacy preserving, but it would require the data subject to be willing to put up something, either accurate and anonymized data or cash or something else. So I think it's more about finding the balance points between security, privacy, secrecy, public good. There are all kinds of concerns that come up. And when we talk about privacy and security, there are only two of the tools that we have. We really need to be thinking. I think there's an entire conversation to be had around trust management and authentication, authorization, key management, all of those things which don't work very well now, certainly are opaque to the user. Key management fails with people who are extremely sophisticated. So getting to the point where you had a signed object that you wanted to share, that you wanted to get to someone else, all of the mechanics behind how that would work are unusable right now at the level of a me to Dave transaction of a photo.
Anyone wants to comment on that? No? Well, then I think it's probably time to open the floor for questions from the audience, if there are questions.
see people are coming.
Yes. Hello, this is Robert Licho from Georgia Tech. So I have a couple of questions or comments. So one of the comments I had was, usually as new technology comes about, it may not necessarily only solve old problems, but may actually bring new ones. So maybe you can discuss that a little bit. And another comment I had was, it's often a race in cybersecurity between people who try to secure things as well as people who try to break things. But there's also a race between people who come up with new technology and then people who try to secure that technology. So when we often think about securing things, we try to secure things that are already there right now that we can see. But we don't actually think about those people who think about new protocols, new technologies, and actually don't have any security considerations in mind. So maybe you can talk about those two issues.
So, to a great extent, the reasons there are new problems when you introduce new technology is because you couldn't have anticipated them until you actually did the technology. It would be really nice if we could have better insight and anticipation and clairvoyance about problems we haven't seen before and ameliorate them before we actually develop or deploy the new technologies. We see this phenomenon, of course, in many fields other than the internet. We see it in agriculture with genetically modified crops. We see it in biological systems. We see it in medicine. So there's nothing, I guess I'm fairly pessimistic about being able to really anticipate the truly new problems that new technology comes. You just sort of like have to be cautious when you deploy it and use it, that you don't get so far ahead that you can't really start addressing new problems until it's too late. Your second point, I think, is a really insightful one. My guess here is that we're in a better place in some sense than we were 10 years ago, and maybe in an even better place 10 years from now, because now it's no longer really acceptable to even design, let alone deploy a technology without understanding its security properties and considering security as part of the design. So I'm somewhat optimistic that we've gone through somewhat of a phase change here, and that it is unlikely for somebody to actually get very far before questions like the ones you've asked. How secure is it? What's the threat model? What are the vulnerabilities? How does it change the attack surface? Get asked soon enough that we have some hope of keeping things in balance.
So on that note, do you think that maybe there should be then a mandate that says, you really have to ask those questions right away?
You can respond first if you want, Dave.
No, go on. Look at how the IETF is different now, for example, than it was 10 years ago. You basically can't get even an internet draft adopted as a working group item without something reasonably credible as the security considerations part of that document. That wasn't true 10 years ago.
Okay, well, it's my first meeting, so I guess I wouldn't know.
So can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Would you
Just
say
what I just said now?
No, what did you just say a minute ago?
That I wouldn't know because it's my first meeting. I haven't kept up with the drafts, yes.
So
I guess I'll have to believe you on that one.
Yeah, interestingly, just like IANA considerations in a document, or it used to be deployment considerations or other things, there is a security considerations section that in most protocol or even requirements documents is required text associated with that. And a lot of them sort of say, use IPsec or no adversaries, not to worry about it, right? So I don't know. I think that it's good. I do worry, and I agree with your observation that if you become really orthodox early on, then security is going to get into the way of solving the problem you want to solve. And I have seen that several times here at the IETF. I think that the solutions that are put together are so orthodox and rigid and costly that they'd never be deployed in practical environments, and it sort of creates this this wedge between operators and some of the protocol designers. But that's sort of a natural evolution. I think interestingly, a lot of the I think to your point is like, the fact that solutions or innovations are used in ways that they weren't initially envisioned is sort of a natural artifact in sort of what good looks like, right? And so when they're used in ways somebody didn't initially envision, then what constitutes a threat to that sort of technology, or I guess a threat's sort of derived by some combination of a motivated, capable adversary that would want to exploit some vulnerability against that, against that technology or a user of that, right? And so I think that a lot of what we see today is because they're used in ways they weren't initially envisioned, or the people that wanted to deploy them just wanted to provide access to something. And then it's either exploited for privacy because someone wants to profit or find a way to fund it, or whatever it is they're doing, or because it's it's a hacktivist or a cyber criminal or a nation state adversary or maybe a cyber terrorist that wants to exploit that. And so I think that building sort of the primitives and the foundational elements like we do in the IET, like, hey, use IPsec or TLS for transport layer protection, and here's some object level protection capabilities for either integrity or confidentiality, and providing common frameworks sort of across the set for everything from IoT to general applications and web browsers is important. Those sort of primitives are important, but yeah, I think it's definitely an arms race, and so yeah, interesting.
Hello, Musa Abdullah. I'm from the regulator in the Kingdom of Bahrain. When I look at my work is mostly as an integrator, tying the different the fields together, if you will, legal, technical, financial, economic, so on and so forth. And I'm mostly involved in the internet from a policy perspective, less a technical perspective. When I look at the internet, the way that I look at it is more as a new layer of geography. It's a new landscape that overlays what we have today, which means that my main concern is understanding how we link between our real world and the new digital world that's evolving on top of it. So one of the comments earlier was that this is very separate from it. Unfortunately, as time goes by, they're becoming more and more closely integrated, and we need to understand how we link between the two. When the internet first started, your avatar online, your persona online was very distinct from your real one. There wasn't that much that tied them together. Today, though, whatever you do in digital space has an impact on real space. But we don't have a clear idea of how to manage these. So my concern is less the security, it's more the privacy. Because the security, we've got a lot of work going on, we've got a lot of idea where we want to go. But the big problem right now is what is the social contract, if you will? What are your rights as a digital citizen once you enter this digital space, where you're no longer bound by physical constraints? We understand the laws of this world, the technology that provides the equivalent of physics and reactions, but we don't understand now what your rights are. So, where do we draw the new paradigm for privacy? When I enter digital space, what are my rights? What information is mine, and what information is public knowledge? And this is a big concern because companies are now crying foul if you try to slap the label of private information on usage statistics, on Facebook posts, on Google searches, because it's a gold mine. And it's something that can be mined repeatedly, unlike natural resources, which can only be mined once. So my question is, what do we want the shape of the future social dynamic of the internet to be? When I go in as a digital citizen into this unified internet, what can I expect to be my rights and responsibilities? Because once we understand that, I think that can help shape the security discussion going forward. Thank you.
Any takers?
I think you've asked a political question in a technical room, that the rights that you can expect and can assert are the rights that you can demand that your government and your institutions protect for you. Unfortunately, in a lot of contexts today, end users are deemed to sign away lots of those rights when as condition of using a service, and we haven't yet seen a lot of legal pushback, although we're starting to see some considerations of privacy as a human right and an internationally protected human right that starts to give more bounds to what can be demanded of you as a condition of going online. And with the further gloss of internet access or access to information as a human right, and the internet as a chief means of obtaining that access, being asked to give up all rights to privacy as a condition of participating in the information network looks like an unfair trade-off, and one that we may start to see more legal pushback against.
So I think that's a very deep question, but I'll reflect that be careful what you ask for. In some countries, the privacy that you give up to a corporation is a very small price to pay for avoiding the scrutiny of your government. And in many countries, the internet is viewed as liberating from government intrusion into people's lives. Conversely, in the US, take note very carefully that the United States Supreme Court has declared that corporations are people. And privacy rights of corporations, if they are attributed the same way some of the other political rights have been attributed to corporations, may wind up being societally more damaging than some aspects of personal privacy laws. So I think we're in a very complex technical space, clearly, but we're in even a more complex space legally and politically and societally. I don't think it's straightforward at all.
I'd agree with that. When I first started doing this work and I looked at how hard all the problems, particularly in the trust and identity space are, I said I want out of this work before we get to reputation and to policy expression. And I think really part of what you're talking about is taking human factors and expressing them in a technical way that meets the user and the server's expectations. That's unbelievably hard as a problem. So I would agree with Dave that you have to be very careful how you move into this space. One of the things I find encouraging is there is beginning to be work done on ethical data handling. So this is what you can do, this is what you should do, this is the space in between. I encourage everyone to look at something, if you Google the Menlo report and CADA, that was looking at collecting network data and the ethics of what's exposed in that data. It's a good model to begin to push forward for how you handle any kind of large collected data and its correlation. But that's just one example.
Dave, before you ask this question, I'd like to close the mic line because we only have 5 minutes left. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Dave Crocker. I'd like to suggest we follow up a little bit on some comments Lucy made right at the end of the questions to the panel sequence that you did. We've been doing standards in the space of authentication and confidentiality for 15 or more years. Other than unauthenticated channel encryption with TLS, nothing has been successful at internet scale in terms of adoption, never mind use. And so the question that I'd like, and this was what I believe Lucy was saying, and she nodded, so I'll take that as agreement on that. The question is, what changes in methodology of producing this work are we going to do that will change this into a success sequence?
I have the mic. Maybe have an answer.
I wish I knew the answer to that question. And the places where I see success are localized. So exemplars, federated identity in the education space where you're dealing with a group of people who are already in the business of both credentialing and acting in loco parentis for a group of users. That there's some success in that model. But those things, you're right, they don't scale, and scaling is the whole thing. As soon as you get away from the localized ability to judge risk and to trust a party and have levers to pull if there's misbehavior, it just doesn't scale. And I have not found a magic bullet.
So I'll make one observation: human society doesn't scale. So absorb that, and
So
it gives you a different perspective on what the likelihood of a technological fix there is.
I'll make a slightly more helpful comment. Maybe, I don't know. I do think, though, that, yeah, to that point, I think that's an important observation. I think the more we can employ things like opportunistic encryption and the likes of technologies that sort of democratize some of the key management other functions. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Dane type capabilities that that sort of distribute some of this and don't require a lot of central authority and some heavy sort of heavy components in the infrastructure, and reliance on third parties by everyone is going to be really valuable. But yeah, I think this is definitely. I also think sort of the challenge is a lot of times, and we realize in the IETF how many times when we're building a new protocol or a new working group or something, and everybody argues about that security requirements section we were talking about earlier, because you want it to be perfect and rigid, and nobody ends up, it says, mandatory to have, not to, or even mandatory to implement, but not mandatory to enable, right, with so many of the protocols. And so I think we certainly see a lot of that. And so I think finding, starting from sort of the UI and working your way back with practical solutions. I mean, in my day job, it's sort of, hey, we've got to solve this problem, and you need to find a way for us to do it securely. Right, and by the way, we've already got this technology chosen and the solution in place and other things. So it certainly makes for a lot of challenge. But I do think that sort of working your way back, when you try and bolt security on and preserve a lot of the primitives after the fact, it's really challenging. That's why I think some of the components and elements that the IETF provides have to consider that.
I'm John Levine. My first question is sort of the same as Dave's. My second question, I think, is related. The first one is, I see a huge disconnect between what a group like this sees as security and what the outside world sees. I mean, around here, my guess is the majority of people here actually understand how to use SMIME or PGP. Okay, in the outside world, and I read non-technical computer books. I mean, people's experience of computer security is you click on a cat video and your browser shows a screen that says, gargle, gargle, parp, 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 very dangerous. Okay, and
I still want to see the cat video.
Okay, says, yeah, click here to see the cat video, right. Okay, and this is a hard problem, and it's a problem that we are totally incompetent to deal with, and so, like, how are we going to fix the user experience? And the flip side of this is that the same way people have no understanding of the security issues, they also have no understanding of sort of the way the internet scale is not similar to human scale. And my example there is that it is now entirely routine for teenagers to use DDoS sites to cheat on multiplayer games, and these are 16-year-old guys who have no idea that they're knocking some town off the net, so that somebody else doesn't get points, and I think this is, and I think these are related in that, like, we sort of see the technology, but other people they just see what's on their screen, and they don't really get both, this is dangerous or this is hostile, and after 20 years, we haven't made much progress explaining, I've been trying to explain this to people for 20 years with limited, I've sold a lot of books, but I'm not sure I've actually educated many people. And I'm wondering, what can we do to sort of make the real world and the internet world more similar in a way that allows people to make more reasonable decisions?
So one way of managing security is through delegation and through, so how can, a way to respond to your question is sort of how can we be trusted agents for the delegation of security decisions by end users? How can we rephrase the questions that they're asking, how can I watch cat videos safely, into questions that we can answer with, here's an environment that will enable you to do that without exposing you to the threat that your machine will be taken over and your bank account's compromised because you clicked, yes, I want to see that video.
Right, but at the same time, not forcing you to trust Comcast, who will then sell all your data. I mean, there's the distinction between trusted and trustworthy.
Right.
I know we're almost out of time.
So I think one of the partial answers there is thinking about scoping trust more narrowly. We shouldn't have to trust the internet in order to, and all of the CAs whose root certificates are in our browsers or operating systems with everything. But we should have we should have more narrowly scoped routes and more narrowly scoped options to delegate. How we design that so that we then get the universal connectivity is admittedly challenging.
This comes back a little to my earlier point about risk analysis and abilities to make judgments, indicators to make judgments. People are really, really bad at judging incremental risk, and they're really, really bad at abstraction. We, as a community, are really, really bad at user interfaces and higher up the stack. So I think there are probably answers to some of those questions, and that for this community, what we can do is give them some of the underlying tools, vocabulary that they could build into a credible story for the user. But getting to that judgment at the point of incremental risk versus an immediate benefit, that's a really tricky point in application interaction, and it's past my pay grade.
So yeah, I would just add, I think one of the traditional problems, certainly we see this a lot with with PKI or other places, but when you put the onus on the user to make a decision about things that they couldn't possibly have the knowledge to make. For example, a collision with certificates or a contention point at some point in the network, or are you going to go to this site because the certificate's expired or it's not chained correctly? They don't know the answers to those questions, right? And so you can't really expect them to do that. At the same time, I think we sort of have an obligation. I hate this sort of regulation side of this, in particular because I spend such a large part of my day job dealing with some of that. But that's sort of one way to make things happen, if not extremely painful. But I think we also have an obligation, in part, this community and and private sector, in the sense of we do things like turn off revocation checking in browsers, or don't check certificate statuses, or do other things because we want to be faster than our competitor because there's not a round trip time to a system that was built to enable security functions in some component. Then those have broad effects, right? And those things don't get turned back on, and it completely circumvents all the the sort of the foundational elements that were put in these protocols. And so I think that we sort of have some obligations as industry to deal with that as well. So I think that's sort of the two sides of the spectrum, is we can either deal with this and be responsible in these things and sort of bite the bullet, or and explain why, or we can we can wait until regulation finds us and tells us what we're going to do and doesn't solve most of the problem, and sort of the adversaries or what you're dealing with evolve to circumvent it anyway. So yeah, either way, I guess. I know we said we didn't want to end on doom and gloom, Andre, so I hope you have some wisdom up there for us.
Well, thank you. And well, surprisingly, we spent our hour, and I would like to thank the panel and all of you for participating in this discussion. I don't think we solve all problems of the world, but at least I hope we generate some food for thought. So thank you very much, and see you next time.
Andre?
Thank you.
It wasn't that bad, I think, right? It's good dialogue. Food for thought. It's food for thought, right? So start the dialogue and then figure out.
Yeah, well, one thing, I don't know if you guys have energy, but I will approach you anyway. Have a virtual panel as a follow-up to that? Just maybe you can...
current landscape of